Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day I try and get every single listener thinking about areas that they don't associate with technology. And today's guest has got quite a story to share with us. His name is Tom Gearing. He is the CEO of Cult Wines, the global leader in fine wine investment. And Cult Wines have been disrupting the fine wine investment industry for some time now. And traditionally, that world was targeted to the, let's say, snooty, high net worth investor. But Tom is now using technology to bring more accessibility, transparency, safety, and credibility to the industry. And as I said, it's quite a story he has there. He's done everything from appearing on BBC's Apprentice to regularly featuring as a market commentator on media outlets such as Bloomberg, CNBC Europe, City AM, and much more. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK, where Tom Gearing, CEO of Cult Wines, is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for inviting me onto the show, Neil. So my name is Tom Gearing, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Cult Wines. Cult Wines is a business that provides private individuals the way to invest into fine wine. So we provide a end-to-end fine wine management and collection service for individuals all over the world. And we currently have clients in more than 80 countries worldwide.
Now, as this is a tech podcast, a question I've got to ask, I mean, we will delve into the tech aspects in a few moments, but can you share your origin story and where your passion for technology and wine came from, and ultimately what put you on the path you're on today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my origin story is quite an interesting one. I think one of the things you should know about me is I started drinking wine far too young. And the main reason for that is that my father was a very passionate wine enthusiast, and he used to sort of, I would say drag, but he used to take me around some of Europe's finest vineyards when I was younger in places like Burgundy and Bordeaux from the age of sort of 11, 12 and 13. So I sort of grew up in the vineyards with him and shared some brilliant and fantastic memories. And the business, started as a family business. My father had some other interests within wine. He actually launched a online price transparency website called Financial Wines back in the year 2000. He raised some venture capital funding to launch that online platform service, which was all around sort of data and essentially almost like an online price aggregation for wine. So like Money Supermarket for wine. Unfortunately, that business didn't ever become profitable before the dot-com crash happened. But in a way, it sort of really shaped where we really shaped our thinking around wine as an asset class, and shaped our thinking around how technology can have a really important part to play in that. And when we launched Cult Wines in 2007, I was actually in university at the time. We essentially had one mission, and that mission was to bring a whole new audience of people to investing in wine. Investing in wine had been always something that was quite inaccessible, always something quite difficult to do, something that had a lot of inherent risks attached to it in terms of security, provenance, authenticity, valuations, liquidity, fraudulent activities that may have happened in the past with some notable exceptions. And so what we wanted to do is say, well, look, wine is an asset class that's been around for 300 years, and it's something that we believe can deliver great value and benefits to people beyond just obviously the financial returns. But let's go on a mission to open this category. Let's make it easier for people to engage with it. And that really was where we started, and that's really where we thought there was an opportunity to look at wine from a slightly different perspective.
And on this podcast, we did have the 2008 winner of BBC's Apprentice, Lee McQueen, on here. And the reason I mention that is you were the runner-up of BBC's Apprentice in 2012. So can you tell me more about that experience? Is it crazy as it seems, or is it not all that it seems? Is there anything you could share on that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a long time ago. I actually filmed it in 2011, so that was over a decade ago. It was, a decade ago. Obviously, I was sort of 23 years of age. really just sort of cutting my teeth in sort of the business world. And, the opportunity came along to come and audition for it. And, I happened to be offered a place. And, at the time it was something that I felt that, would be a great experience for me. And really going into that experience, really sort of was something that was completely unique, and you'd never be able to have the opportunity to do it again. And if I'm being completely honest, I think post that show being on TV, there was a lot of positivity for it from the business, in terms of shining a light on myself and the business and what we do, and definitely helped give us a lot of credibility in those early years when we were really trying to sort of make a name for ourselves and establish a sort of proof of concept. So it definitely had a lot of knock-on benefits from that. And I think from a personal perspective, I had an incredible experience. I learned a lot about myself and how I can deal with things under pressure. And it really helped me understand what my strengths were as a business owner, as a business leader. And I think I've really harnessed it, but it also made me realize some of the weaknesses that I have. And I think that's helped shape, obviously, the direction of the business in terms of understanding where I need to bring in other skill sets and talents to the business to help us grow where I might not have those strengths. So I think as an exercise, it was really a baptism of fire to actually understand from an individual perspective, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses? And I think that does have a lot to play in how you then shape your business going forward.
Absolutely, I love that. And of course, that path led you to become Cult Wine's co-founder, the global leader in fine wine investment. But can you tell me more about Cult Wines? We will have people listening all around the world. So for people hearing about you for the first time, a little bit about Cult Wines, the wine investment industry, and ultimately how you're disrupting it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, we think that wine is an increasingly exciting asset class. One, because the fundamentals of wine are consistent, they're constant, and they have been around for a long, long time. Essentially, the fine wines that we deal with, the greatest wines in the world, they're made in finite supply, and they're a consumable product. So in the sort of category of alternatives, where you have stuff like crypto, and you have art, and you have classic cars and property, it's the only alternative within that sort of category that has this unique concept of actually being a consumable product, in that it's dwindling in supply. And those sort of finite supply finite supply that's ever diminishing means that fine wine prices have always appreciated over time. So we believe fine wine is really increasingly interesting asset class, because the fundamentals of it are consistent, and they've been around for 400 years, and it's not necessarily going to change. And I think what's really exciting right now is that we're in an environment from a macroeconomic perspective where we've got the inflation, sort of rearing its head in the sort of near horizon distance, of people starting to think, okay, if we've got inflation coming down the road, what levers can I pull to sort of deflect that inflation? What ways can I protect myself against inflation? We're still in a record low interest rate environment where it's very difficult for anyone to sort of make any sort of yield from their savings. And I think that there is a certain degree of financial market volatility that's going to be coming down the road. And so I think all of those reasons are really playing into the alternative space. And I think wine obviously has a part to play in that. But at the same time, wine as a product and as a category is also increasing in popularity. I mean, over the last 12 to 18 months, during the pandemic, even though people weren't going out to restaurants and opening bottles of wine at a dinner table, people were spending a lot more time at home and researching about wine and learning about wine and educating them and joining virtual tastings or watching videos on YouTube or on Instagram. And I think that there's been a real rising tide of engagement around wine. And, I think social media and technology has really helped open up the doors to a product that before had sort of almost had this feeling of it being quite dusty and antiquated and, sort of bottles in an old cellar. Now it's sort of something to be celebrated and open up. And, okay, it might be an expensive bottle of wine, but why don't you come and learn about the history and the heritage and the stories behind it? And, you look at some of the stats at the moment, and in the US, I think they were saying that since they've reopened sort of travel, Napa wineries have had like 150% increase in tourist visits, or visits, people just turning up at the wineries. And we're actually seeing the same trend happen in Europe. People want to go to Tuscany and visit these wineries. They want to go to Champagne and the Rhone Valley and all these fantastic locations. And I think that really points to a higher engagement around wine. And you've started to see it in the retail sector. Look at Vivino which a lot of people will be familiar with from a tech perspective. 30 to 40 million active users. Valuation, very large recent fundraising where their valuation went up around sort of $800 million US. And, even recent sort of stock listings in the UK with Virgin Wines and even with the sort of Naked Wine Group, obviously, posting really, really positive numbers. So I think broadly wine as a category is a really, really exciting place. And then sort of bringing it back to sort of this podcast and the conversation around technology, the digitization of all areas of our lives have become more digitized over the last 12 to 18 months. We've all had to accept digitization. And companies that have had that infrastructure in place have benefited the most to a certain extent from the pandemic. But I think that, that digitization and that more acceptance of doing things through technology, doing things through digitization has definitely accelerated, consumer uptake of wine and consumer engagement in wine. And it has opened the doors for, much more exciting ways for things to move forward. And then to sort of link it back to what we do and the excitement that we have around wine is that, look at what's happening with things like, Robinhood and, free trade here in the UK, consumer investors. You've got a new wave of investors coming in. Look at the crypto platforms like Coinbase. People are looking for, as I said, if you start putting all of these different component parts together, the proposition and the excitement around wine is very, very strong. And right now, Cult Wines is the category leader globally in wine investment. We manage $300 million worth of fine wine on behalf of private individuals around the world. And we make it easy and accessible to anyone to start investing in wine. We do have a minimum investment level of 10,000 GBP, but clients or customers or potential interested people, there is a very easy 3, 4, 5-step process for those individuals to go through in terms of how much you're looking to invest, what your risk profile is, what your, sort of objectives are, what's your investment term, you're looking sort of 3 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years, but based around your personal investment preferences, we build, risk-adjusted wine portfolios based upon 10 years of wine trading data that we have internally, using our own data science and algorithms to build the most effective risk-adjusted portfolio for your objectives. And essentially, we make that process as easy as possible. We take care of all of the storage and the insurance. None of that has to be any consideration for the investor. The investor simply says, I want to allocate some of my capital or some of my wealth to fine wine as an alternative. And we provide by far and away, the most effective, most proven with a track record of delivering 8 to 9% annualized returns, easiest, most seamless, frictionless and enjoyable way to engage with this as a product and as an asset class.
And I love the contrast there where you're talking about the rich heritage and history, but then also talking about algorithms and data. So what does technology play in attracting more people to look into fine wine investment? Because like you were saying, if we look at any savings account now, it's 1%, 1.5%, whatever, and people are going to crypto, looking at alternate investments and wine too. So what role is tech playing in this?
Yeah, so the role that tech plays in for us is actually helping us make it more scalable, helping us make it more accessible to a much larger audience. And I think it's really interesting what you just mentioned, because our vision and what we really truly believe in is that the most effective way to invest in wine is actually blending sort of the latest data-driven sort of technology with human expertise. I mean, there is a certain degree of human expertise around qualitative appreciation of wines, having that insider information around what's happening in the vineyards, what the yields are looking like, what type of viticulture practices a particular winemaker's undertaking. They're the type of things you can't necessarily get the data, you can't necessarily mine the data to understand that. So they're more sort of qualitative factors that we can take in as human experts, and having the right sort of networks within the sort of wine industry to understand those parameters. But then on the other hand, there's a huge amount of data that needs to be crunched. We take a very much a sort of financial markets approach to wine, which is, whilst we love wine and the bottle and the label that's on the wine and the history behind it's important, we also want to have a quite objective approach to it, which is how do we generate yield from a bottle of wine? And that is by finding value. And we can find value by crunching the numbers. So that's looking at available production in the market versus, how much was released, what's the level of consumption in the market, what's the maturity window, what's the drinking window, what are the critic scores, what are the community tasting scores that are being published, on different sort of platforms. and what are the current trading prices in the market. So if we can take all of that data, we can crunch it through algorithms, we can essentially smash two sides of the puzzle together, which is the sort of human expertise you need to have to be able to identify particular wines, or particular producers, or particular regions you think there are opportunities in that are maybe things you can't see through data, and then actually evaluating that with the data you can see to identify the best way to invest in the best places to allocate your capital. And so really what we're trying to create is this blend between sort of wine and technology and investment expertise. And we really are the crossroads between the three. But essentially, for us to bring this to a much larger audience, we need to be able to be doing that on a much larger scale. We need to be able to be effectively delivering the same level of quality and product and service to a much larger audience. And we need to be able to do it quicker and faster. And so the only ways for us to do that is by actually using technology, and that is machine learning, AI and algorithms. That's by building, data centers and, data infrastructure within the business so that we can make those decisions very quickly and we can relay that information to our customers and in the end deliver, really good products and service to them.
And one of the things I always try and do on this podcast is trying to get people to think differently about areas that they don't associate with technology, even though they're surrounded by it. And for example, we will have people listening that might be enjoying a glass of wine as they're listening to this podcast, and maybe even thinking about investing in wine, but they won't associate technology with it. So if we look at the industry as a whole, is there anything you can share about the role of technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're currently working on a couple of projects that are very, very exciting that can have some wide-ranging implications within the wine market. But if I answer your question, I think the way that we've approached this is we've looked at sort of inefficiencies within the wine market. We've also looked at, essentially challenges that we need to overcome to grow the category. And the challenges we need to overcome are essentially around sort of security, provenance, and authenticity. The problem with wine as an asset and as a product is that the fine wines in the world have been susceptible to fraudulent activity. How do you know a bottle of wine that is sitting on your dinner table is authentic and is the real thing? Now, okay, someone with a good palate and got a good experience and good knowledge of what a bottle of wine and label should look like, we should be able to ascertain. But, techniques that, fraudulent individuals are using these days are getting more sophisticated. So, so that's one challenge. Another challenge is sort of security of the asset. Wine is, a product that sits in a warehouse that you have ownership of. So if you're a client of ours in Tokyo and your wines are in the UK in a warehouse, there's a lot of trust and faith you're putting in us to tell you that wine is in a warehouse and that warehouse is safe and your wine's stored under your name. And then there's a question around settlement periods and liquidity. So, with wine, because it's a physical good, there's been a lot of historically unnecessary movement of goods to actually transact between individuals. So if you think there's a very sort of classic example of liquidity within the wine market, it'd be an auction house. So in an auction house, you're an individual, you go, I've got some cases of wine I want to sell. You send it to the auction house 3 months before the auction occurs, someone bids on it, they pay the auction house, the auction then supplies the wine to that individual, the trade happens. But, you're talking about sort of a 3 to 6 month settlement period from that start to finish from the buyer and the seller. You're also talking about the cash and the assets actually going into the auction house before they're actually given back to the individuals. So they're the sort of challenges that we looked at, and we thought, well, what sort of technologies are available? What sort of technologies are out there to essentially help us, provide solutions to these issues? So we're actually working on a blockchain solution that we're building internally, and that is to hopefully try and solve some of these issues. So from the sort of authenticity perspective, we believe that by using a combination of sort of near field chips, NFCs, for example, that, this day and age are very, very small. Obviously, we all have them in our smartphones. We all use them to use Apple Pay. There's no reason why NFTs can't be integrated by wineries or by producers at the bottling stage. All wines have a capsule, a cork, a label on the front, and they have a glass bottle. So it would be very easy to incorporate a NFC near field chip that has some sort of tamper-proof technology, either in the capsule or on top of the cork or on the label or at some point on the physical appendage of the bottle. And then once you have that NFC integration with the actual packaging of the wine, and you have the blockchain ledger, which would be a public blockchain ledger, then essentially you can allow wineries to essentially register every bottle which has an NFC to the blockchain ledger. And then if you have every participant within the life cycle of wine, so the logistics freight forward company, the distribution company, the importer, the wine retailer, the consumer, the warehouse, if all of these different links in the chain maintain that blockchain record, then essentially you can create an irrefutable life cycle provenance of that particular bottle of wine, so that in 10 or 15, 20 years time, when that wine is mature and at its peak and it's ready to be consumed, that bottle can sit on a table. An individual could scan, the NFC chip, and immediately that provides a public blockchain record to say this wine was bottled and left the winery on this date. It was imported into the UK on this date. It was in this warehouse. These are the different people that had owned it through this period of time. It was then shipped into, Hong Kong on this date, and then, it's now today's date and you're consuming the bottle. And I think that has a lot of powerful potential benefits to the fine wine market, not just from a consumer perspective, but also from elevating and evolving the market to, rid and remove a lot of the issues around counterfeiting and deliver potentially an asset class that could really, really grow significantly. But that technology could also then be applied from a storage perspective. So, for example, from an environmental perspective, there is quite a significant unnecessary movement of goods in the wine industry because, as I said, a lot of these wines that we deal with, they're made to age for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, right? So no one's actually going to be consuming these wines for a long time. But actually, if you look at the life cycle of some of these wines, they can be, a Bordeaux wine can be made in a particular year. And from the point of time that it's bottled at the winery to the point of time that someone consumes it, it's gone to 10 different countries, owned by 10 different people. It's traveled up and down the M4 5 times. It's gone through the Channel Tunnel. It's been on a plane to Hong Kong. It's then been in 3 different warehouses. It's then ended up in a restaurant's wine cellar, and then someone's ended up consuming it. I mean, the environmental impact from that is huge, and it's very, very inefficient. There's a huge amount of costs attached to that. So what we also believe is potentially possible with using this sort of blockchain layer of security contracts is essentially removing the need for wines to actually be physically moved anywhere. I mean, why can't the wines be produced? They could then actually be stored or maintained somewhere close to where they're produced. Italian wines in Italy at some sort of depository or custodian place. Similarly, someplace in France or in Bordeaux. And essentially, the security contracts that are created using the blockchain layer, essentially, they could be used to be traded between individuals. So if me and you decided we wanted to buy and sell a wine between each other, we don't physically move and sell the wine to each other. We just trade the security contract. The case of wine never has to leave the warehouse until the point in time that someone actually wants to consume it. And this is a really interesting concept because I not only think it has a quite material benefit to the wine industry from a cost and environmental impact, and actually will hopefully to a certain extent maintain and maximize the potential of the wine and make the wines more enjoyable when they are at their point of maturity. But the speed of settlement is immediate. We used that example before of the auction house, but in this example, it's immediate settlement. Like the ownership is transferred immediately, and if this is on a public blockchain ledger that's verifiable, then that there is no differentiation between transferring your assets and receiving cash or monetary benefits. And similarly, if you're a buyer, you're not giving your money to a entity where you're then at risk for a period of time until that asset is delivered to you. You are literally changing it. It's interchangeable at the point of settlement. So a lot of these things are really, really interesting for the industry. I think there is broad consumer attraction to these type of ideas. And I think that it's a natural evolution over time for the wine market to really take up a lot of these things to actually help alleviate some of the issues that exist.
Love what you're doing there. Incredibly cool how you're leveraging technology. And if we were to just zoom out for a moment, at Cult Wines, you are providing this physical fine wine portfolio management service to a wide range of people, really, from private individuals, clients of family offices, wealth managers and private banks all over the world. But do you have any use cases you can share just to bring it to life for anyone listening?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, typically our clients are private individuals, mass affluent, high net worth individuals, people that, as I said, we're all in the same boat at this point in time. People are looking for ways to diversify. I think, as I mentioned earlier, our sort of long-term, track record of performance is around 8 to 9% annualized since 2009. But I think where we really add value is our approach to the market and our sort of active management. So the way that we understand wine, and this has been built up over the last decade, is that the evolution of wine prices isn't linear. So a wine price, whilst might look at it at 2 points in time, and let's say it's point X and then point X plus 10 years. At X plus 10 years, it might be worth 1,000, and on point X, it was worth 5,000. So there's 100% difference between the 2 points in time. But the direction of travel for that wine might not necessarily have been linear. Because of the fundamentals that I described around the wines being produced and made for long-term storage, for the demand for consumption of wines will increase over time as they hit their maturity windows. The supply-demand imbalance that happens over time is uneven. There's an uneven distribution of that demand over time. And there's obviously an uneven distribution of the supply becoming constrained over time. And these points in time do result in spikes or plateaus in the price. So typically, just to give an example, what we would do and how we would approach it, which is different to how maybe the more historical wine merchant, broker, auction house would do it, is they would say, buy the wine, hold it for 10 years, you buy it for X, you get 100 plus X. Whereas what we would do is we would say, well, actually in that 10X period, there were 60 periods of positivity and 40 periods of negative growth or neutral growth. So essentially what we want to try and do is we want to try and actually optimize your whole period during that 10X period. So for example, if we know that there were 2-3 year cycles of sustained, 40% growth, so actually over 6 years, 80% of the growth happened. And in the other 4 years, 20% of the growth happened. What we want to do is actually trade you in and out of those positions. So we are always evaluating price evolution. We're always evaluating sort of price performance against expectations. And our portfolio management service is an active service. So if we allocate our clients to a particular wine, if that wine is increased in value by 25, 30% within a period of time, we then feel that its projections or what we expect it to do over the next 12, 18, 24 months is maybe 1 or 2% or 5%. Our advice would be then to reduce your exposure to that particular asset and transfer your capital into something else. So that active management has really been a fundamental part of our approach and is a really strong reason why we outperform the market. And, just to give you a couple of examples, we've had clients that have invested sort of 5 years ago. We've done some comparisons, like, someone invested 5 years ago, put in 50,000 GBP. We've actually compared, if they'd have put that £50,000 and just held it, what their returns would have been versus the active management returns that we've created. And on average, the delta between the two, it roughly works out around 12%. So, for example, on average, we're delivering 12% extra in absolute returns through our active management approach. So it's a difference between putting 50K in and making a 50% absolute return over that 5-year period, and putting 50K in and making a 62% absolute return over that 5-year period. And so that's really what we look to achieve, that outperformance for our clients, and creating that delta between that sort of buy and hold long-term strategy versus a more active portfolio management strategy. But going back to your original sort of questions, that is only really possible with data and technology and making, building the right processes and having the right software in place to actually identify those opportunities.
And before you came on the podcast, I was doing a little bit of research on you guys, and you're far too modest to say this, but I think I should highlight that you've received a number of awards, including appearing on the Sunday Times Fast Track 100 in, I think, 2015 and 17, as well as receiving a Queen's Award for International Trade. But I've got to ask, what were the biggest lessons that you've learned along the way? And especially if we've got a startup founder listening somewhere in the world at the beginning of their journey, is there any advice that you would pass down?
Yeah, it's really interesting one, because I think sometimes the awards only really come, and the accomplishments only really come after you've really baked in a strategy, and an award that we might receive in 2017 is something that we'd sort of not foreseen, but we started baking those numbers in 2015, 2016, and I think that's always been a way that I've approached business, which is having a view of where we want to get to and understanding, okay, if we want to be there in 2 years or in 3 years, how do we get to that point? And actually make decisions today, make smart decisions today that are going to start laying the groundwork for growth in 24 months, 18 months. This quarter's great, but this quarter's performance is as a result of work and information and data and strategies that we were putting into place, a year previous. And I think as the business owner and as the CEO, you have to lay the vision and the groundwork and the roadmap to actually achieving the aims. And you've always got to be looking forward. Of course, you need a really strong team around you to then be responsible for the day-to-day operations and the management of the day-to-day operations to make sure that the business is running as it should be. But I think it's really important to always have a view on where you are as a business, because it's always evolving, it's always changing. And I think one of the best things that I started doing, and I think I've really benefited from, is every year, taking 2 weeks out of my schedule and rewriting the business plan every year. And actually, sometimes it's quite interesting to go back and sort of reread what I put down on paper sort of 2-3 years ago and actually see how it evolves and how it sort of takes shape and makes changes. And I think doing that and making that process a solid part of your cycle also helps you to embrace change and evolve over time, because you're always thinking about ways to move the needle, how you can implement procedures and changes to the business that are going to help deliver growth. So I think that's something that is really, really important, and something that I hold really true to myself. And I think the other thing I would say for any sort of new founders is, it's amazing. I've personally found that it doesn't matter what business you're in, what size you're in, what type of industry you're in, other CEOs and other company founders are probably having the same issues and share the same problems that you're having. It's amazing how much commonality there is between company owners and CEOs around issues and things and problems that you face. And actually, having a good group of other CEOs and companies, it doesn't matter what industry they're in, it could be completely different. Actually sharing those ideas and sharing those pain points is actually a really, really positive experience, and you can actually learn a huge amount from that. And I found that I found it really good, because I think sometimes it can be, you can feel lonely and feel like, oh, I'm the only person that's dealing with these issues and problems. But actually, you start talking to other people, you're like, oh my God, that's exactly the same thing that I'm dealing with, even though it's in a completely different industry at a completely different scale. But essentially, a lot of these problems are human problems, they are communication problems, and they are business growth problems. And how do you deal with them? So I think that's something that, again, I find really beneficial, that I've used and learned from. And the other thing for me is, I don't know, I think there's a trend to like always think about and talk about business leaders as these people that are like machines who wake up at 5 a.m. and go to bed at 1, and they travel to 35 different countries and they read 1 billion books and they're doing all these amazing things. And you think, wow, this person like a superhuman. Like, how can I ever be like that? But do you know what? I think you have to find your own rhythm and don't put pressure on yourself to try and be someone you're not. And I think really the most important thing is actually making one really good, important, great decision a day, rather than trying to force yourself into doing something. And, I think this whole idea of, working hard is working a 20-hour day, like, it's just bullshit in my opinion. I think working hard is working smart. And I think working smart is down to having good people around you, being transparent, being open, having the right information, and also be willing to be proved wrong and actually be happy to be proved wrong. Because I think sometimes, people are too narrow-minded. And I think sometimes being proved wrong is a great thing, because actually it means you've taken in the information and you've made the good decision based upon, the information that's in front of you. So I think my personal opinion, it might be completely different to other people, but I think, it's really important as a CEO and as a business owner is to work to your rhythm, your own rhythm, what makes you work your best. Don't be influenced or sort of be overawed by how other people are portrayed in the media or how other people are talked about. And I think it's about working smart, not overworking yourself just for the sake of saying, well, I've worked a 20-hour day. It's much more important to do a 10-hour day and make 3 great decisions to do a 20-hour day and make no great decisions.
Fantastic advice, and so refreshing to hear somebody say that out loud as well. But we're at that time of the year where we're already starting to think about next year. So what's next for Cult Wines? Are there any emerging tech trends that excite you, or any plans ahead that you can share? Appreciate you probably can't share too much, but is there anything you can?
Yeah, I've sort of hinted and touched on a few things that sort of are coming down the pipe for us quite soon. And yeah, we've got some really exciting product developments that are coming out. We're working on some new sort of platforms and services, and some sort of, as I said, like the blockchain project, the inventory management project, the global storage project, the data side of things. These are all things that are really, really important. Yeah, we see them as being really strong pillars to our sort of company foundations. So, things in all those areas will be happening and sort of will be more public over the next sort of 3 to 6 months. I think from a broader perspective in terms of sort of technology, I think that, the continued emergence of AI and how AI can be used, especially from a consumer perspective, is really exciting. I think that continues to accelerate with pace, and it's amazing to see the new developments that are coming along. And then from a really boring, personal, geeky perspective, I think quantum computing in the future is something that could be really exciting.
Well, we started the podcast today talking about your origin story, but I'm now going to ask you what the soundtrack to that origin story was. Is there a particular song or piece of music that has accompanied you in your career that we can add to our Spotify playlist? Is it going to be Lilac Wine or Red Wine? I'm interested in where you're going to go with this.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm giving away any secrets here around a podcast, but obviously I was sent this question ahead of time because obviously, didn't want to be put on the spot. And obviously because of the focus around technology, it was so weird. As soon as I saw that question, I was like, yeah, I know exactly what song it would be. And this is probably going to be really left field for a lot of your audience and your listeners. But when it was like, what song has a connection or for me reminds me of technology, there's one song immediately that struck in my mind. And it's a song by a DJ producer called Todd Terje, which is Todd and then Terje Terje. And the song's called Inspector Norse. And this is going to be like, people will listen to it and they're like, what is this going on about? But the reason why is like, when you listen to this song, it's so fantastical. It has so much it sounds like it was made in a computer. Like it probably was made in a computer. I mean, let's be fair, because it's made by a DJ, but the songs and the sounds and the synths and everything around it and the bounciness of it and the beat behind it, it feels like it's come from outer space. It feels like it almost feels like it's sort of neutrinos popping into existence for a brief second into space and then disappearing again. And that's the only way I can describe it. And so when I saw the line, what song reminds you of technology? I was like, that's the song that reminds me of technology. Because when I listen to that song, I'm always transported into like this world of like particle physics and nanotechnology and like electrons buzzing about and neutrons and all this type of stuff. So that was the thing for me, and even like lasers and all that type of stuff. So for me, that was 100% the one to go for. So I hope it's a good addition to the playlist. I think it's probably a bit more left field than you were expecting, but I hope you enjoy it.
No, left field is great, and I think you've just awoken the curiosity of everyone listening. So I'll make sure that is added to the playlist. But before I let you go, for anyone listening, want to find out more about Cult Wines or contact a member of your team, what's the best starting point?
Yeah, so our main website for our wine investment product is wineinvestment.com. As you can imagine, that took a long time to come up with that name. So yeah, if you're interested in Cult Wines and what we're doing from a wine investment perspective, then wineinvestment.com is the best place to find us.
Well, I love how you've blended everything together here, from human experience, heritage, history, to solve things around efficiencies, authenticity, liquidity, and using technology such as blockchain, data, algorithms. It's fantastic, that rich blend that you've created there. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing your story with me today.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me on, Neil.
I must admit, I'm kicking myself a little because we forgot to mention that Cult Wines has also recently announced the release of its non-fungible token, or NFT to the cool kids. And I just love how this industry is being transformed by technology and that blend between history, heritage, human expertise and technology to solve real problems. And these are the kind of stories I love sharing on here. And if you've got one or you know somebody that has one, please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But it's time for me to sit down and have a nice glass of wine now, so I will bid you farewell. I'll be waiting in your podcast feed bright and early tomorrow, but a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.